All right, joining me now here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is author and journalist Nell Bernstein. Nell's work has been seen in Salon, Mother Jones, The Washington Post. She is the author of the new book, Burning Down the House, The End of Juvenile Prison, which you can find at nellbernstein.com. You can also follow her on Twitter at Nell Bernstein. Nell, thank you so much for being on the show.
I'm glad to be here.
All right, so now let's actually begin by discussing what exactly led you to write a book on juvenile prisons.
Well, it was a long journey. My first job out of college was working as a counselor at a group home for delinquent girls. And I was probably 22 years old. They were 16, 17. And from day one, they would ask me, "Who the heck are you to tell us what to do?" I was never very good at that job because I didn't have an answer. I tended to think they were right. I couldn't figure out what power was invested in me that I could tell them when they could leave and when they could come back and when and what they could eat, or even when and whether they could see their families. So that really planted the question of the relationship between a kid's delinquent acts and our power over her or him in my head. Fortunately, about a year in, I was offered a job as the editor of a youth newspaper. So again, I was working with teens, but they were not there under court order. They had chosen to be there. The problem there was that it got hard to get the paper out because it was the 90s and my staff kept getting arrested. And that's when I really began to follow them through that journey.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's actually start off because in the book, you've done a lot of research. A lot of this stuff has spanned several years where you've been in contact with people who were in juvenile prisons. You visited quite a few of them, the prisons itself. Tell us what a juvenile, I mean, there's many, they're different, I suppose, but talk about some of the different juvenile prisons and kind of what a standard day for an incarcerated child is like there.
Sure. And, one thing that is remarkable is the sameness among them. Even if the architecture is different, the philosophy is different, once you put walls around a group of people, the dynamic just kind of it becomes identical. People often ask me if I'm scared going into juvenile prisons. I'm not scared of the kids. I go in asking them to talk about themselves, which makes me very popular. But the whole architecture of the place is scary, and it does affect me. It's designed to inspire fear. The large state juvenile prisons, they have the coils of razor wire around them and the sally port and all the sort of affectations of a regular prison. You'll see the kids marching in a line with their arms folded from one place to another. So militaristic affectations, uniforms. So on the one hand, there's this undercurrent of contained rage and fear. On the other hand, there's this tremendous boredom of a bunch of young, would-be lively teenagers literally held captive. Sometimes I felt like I could almost feel the boredom and lethargy in waves inside these places. You asked about a typical day.
Yeah.
They have to go to school. Sometimes you peek into a classroom and it looks like a classroom. Other times a lot of heads are down and kids are sleeping. I think the main thing that young people talk about when they talk about their day in a juvenile prison is that every single action is controlled. When they get up, make their bed, walk to breakfast, have X minutes to eat breakfast, when they shower. So all their movements are controlled. Every part of their day is routine. And what that does is make it difficult when they get out to do things like make decisions for themselves. Sometimes even the simplest decisions, they'll say, become hard because they're so used to this culture of complete control.
In the book, you talk to and tell the story of many different students. One of the first ones you talk to is a young man named Curtis, who went in for something that was supposed to be a 2-year sentence. It ended up being much longer. He ended up spending a lot of time in solitary confinement, which is, again, the UN has called it torture. It really is something that no human being should have to go through, much less a child. Tell the story of Curtis and how he ended up in prison and what his experience was once he was in there.
Well, the important word that you used was child. Curtis was 10 years old when he entered the California Youth Authority, which, you've got your local juvenile halls, but these are the large state facilities ostensibly meant for the worst of the worst. And as I described, very prison-like. So Curtis ended up in solitary confinement because he went in as a fighter. And he went in as a fighter because he was terrified. There were guys up to 24, 25 in there, and he assumed that as the smallest guy in the building, he needed to prove himself. And I remember him saying things like, a lot of kids use animal imagery to describe how it felt to be caged. I remember Curtis saying, thrown to the animals, I became an animal. They treated me like an animal when I was just a little kid who was misguided and needed some help. So he's somebody I met through another project many years ago and was definitely one of the kids who pointed me in the direction of this book. I wanted to know how we could so dehumanize a 10-year-old that we could put him in that kind of a situation.